but I do want to start with Celtics Hawks, a game that ended about an hour ago or so. The Celtics are now up 2-0 in this series. They beat the Atlanta Hawks 119-106 tonight. Look, Trae Young and DeJounte Murray combined for 53 points and 12 rebounds, or 12 assists in this game, 6 steals, 9 rebounds. On the surface, these numbers look okay. And frankly, I think DeJounte played pretty well in this game. I think that a lot of the issues for the Hawks very strongly come down to schematic concerns that they have because of the presence of Trae Young and the issues that guys, let alone like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, bring up in those settings. But moreover, guys like Derek White and even like Malcolm Brogdon really are just capable of taking advantage of size-based mismatches in that way. Having said that, like there have been very few moments where I felt like it's been a size issue for Trae. There have been some, don't get me wrong. It's been a lot more, to me at least, effort and awareness based for the Hawks in general. But I think a lot of it, in my view, comes down to Trae Young on the defensive end being emblematic of some of the issues that they have defensively, schematically, and in terms of just like off-ball awareness, communication, being able to switch and adjust on the fly in the way that you have to in a series against Boston.
Yeah, the Celtics are just a brutal matchup for Atlanta because there really is nowhere for Trae Young to hide. And, you know, in the playoffs, particularly when you have bigger guards in the way that the Celtics do, you're going to want to cross match, so to speak, and try to put Trae Young on more of a spot up shooter, on somebody who's not going to be as much of a threat off the bounce. And the Celtics don't really have that because every guy that they play out there is either a point of attack, dribble penetration guy, or pretty good on repenetration. That's the way that Brad Stevens has constructed this roster, and all of the lineups that Joe Mazzulla throws out there always have really good balance of the playmakers. So, you know, you mentioned Derek White, like they started to be more aggressive on him in ball screens in game 2, which is not something I'd expect the Atlanta Hawks to really do against Derek White. But it was one of the only ways to try to help Trae Young out in some of those situations. You know, Brogdon can completely muscle him and just get to his spots regardless and barely feel Trae Young's presence on there. You certainly can't have him guard Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum in one-on-one situations. And then if you try to put him on Marcus Smart, you know that mismatch bully post-up is always going to be a card that he'll pull out of his back pocket at the time you least expect it. And the way that he can physically duck in Trae Young, it just wears you down, particularly when you know how much Trae is carrying on the offensive end of the floor. So this is a nightmare matchup for the Atlanta Hawks, just in terms of the places that you can put Trae Young, because there really aren't many. And I think the mental toll of something like that is starting to really chip away, not just at Trae's effort, but kind of the collective buy-in on the defensive end of the floor.
So I don't disagree with anything you're saying in terms of this being a brutal matchup for the Hawks. It 100% is. And I think that it extends beyond Trae Young in regard to the way that this roster is constructed. Again, like I don't really want to like hammer DeJounte Murray. I think that would be really unfair after the game he's played. I think he has not been the issue for Atlanta. I will just say I think DeJounte is a much better on-ball defender than he is an off-ball defender. And you will see these like random doubles at times that just don't work against Boston.
Yeah.
Right. If you just randomly like go off on your own and go out of scheme and double somebody against Boston, you're going to get killed. It's just, they have too many guys that are too smart, that can find where the double is coming from, that can find the open man, and they're so good at just reversing it around the perimeter. They're going to find an open three. You just can't rely on that. I will also note that I think DeAndre Hunter is also not a great off-ball defender. He is a big physical wing who takes on matchups at a really high level. He is someone you can throw on Jason Tatum. I'm not saying you're going to have success against Jason Tatum necessarily, but he's someone that you can at least feel like is going to make Jason work on some level. He is not a great off-ball defender. Like there was a moment, I think it was in the second quarter of this game tonight, where it almost felt like he thought they were in zone and just like randomly decided to leave Jaylen Brown at the top of the key to like double. And Jaylen was just like, okay, I'm just going to back cut you now. And like he just got a wide open layup because of it. But I think that the biggest problem with the Hawks in that regard is Trae Young. And that is why, you know, we can talk about there being other issues with the Hawks defensively. There are. It's hard to account for those other issues when you also have the biggest glaring one there. Like it feels like the Celtics have not even kicked it out of like second gear at this point.
No.
And like they have not run anything creative in this series, really. Like the most creative thing I've seen from them was like in the first quarter after they had like a couple of empty possessions where they ran like a side Spain pick and roll off of an Al Horford handoff where, you know, Tatum basically rejected the handoff, came back around to a flipped screen from Horford, followed by that Spain back screen from Marcus Smart to get Trae Young involved in the primary action. Cause it's just really, really hard to pre-switch Spain actions like that. And, you know, Jason Tatum got a super easy layup out of it, but it's not even the schematic issues that Trae Young presents for Atlanta right now. It's like the run of play issues. Like there was a play, I think again in the second quarter in the midst of their like big run to really break this thing open, where Derek White, like, you know, dribbled the ball up, handed it to Tatum, and then White took like a step toward Tatum, like he was going to go and set a screen. And I swear there were probably like 5 feet of separation still between White and Tatum. It wasn't like they were even really at the mesh point of the screen yet. And Trae just like way like hard hedged out and took himself like completely out of the play. And Derek White was just like, well, I guess this is now just like a ghost screen and I'm just going to back cut him. But it wasn't even like a ghost screen. It was just reading the play and being very intelligent on Derek White's part. Those are the breakdowns that just like can't happen. There were a couple of moments where Trae was really, really bad in transition defense, like just like total like olaying at midcourt trying to get a steal, or there was a run out in the first half where Derek White just beat him down the court in like a pretty substantial way. There was one play in the second quarter that really pissed me off, and I also think it pissed off Quinn Snyder because I think he took him off after this play, where it was like a steal in the backcourt where I think Jason Tatum like pickpocketed, I can't remember who it was, and got the ball on the wing. And then Trae is on the weak side and he's like the low man help defender in this scenario. And Tatum beats his man going baseline. This is just like the most automatic help. And Trae recognizes it. He takes 2 steps to go help. And then he's just like, no, I'm good. I'm not even going to like try this. And look, Trae Young is small. And I don't know how much of an impact he would have made in that setting. It was a far rotation. It was a long rotation, but it was just like emblematic of the effort to me. It was like a fake help. Like he's like, yeah, I'm not going to do this.
It's the playoffs. You want to see more effort.
And this is a dude that genuinely led them to the Eastern Conference Finals a few years ago. And I think you can talk about like how much the league has changed, how much this Hawks team has changed, certainly. But man, I don't see any of that like verve. I don't see any of that energy, any of that, like that dude was like an absolute motherfucker in terms of confidence. You know what I mean? Like he was like he was in the middle of Madison Square Garden, shutting every single person in the stands up. And that just like, I don't see that. Do you see that when you watch him right now?
No, I don't see that level of confidence. And there could be myriad of factors that go into influencing that. I'm not going to try to take a stab at kind of what goes with it. I think stylistically in this series, Atlanta has always had two bigs on the floor. They play Collins and Capella or Okongwu together. And, when you have two bigger bodies and you have a guy like Trae Young out there, it so limits and strangles your defensive versatility. The
Yep.
story of this series has been how many naked layups or dunks the Boston Celtics have gotten at the rim. And that was a tone that they
Yeah.
established in the first quarter of game one. It
Yeah.
allowed them to get out to a really good start, and it just hasn't felt like they've had to really work for anything on the offensive end as a result.
Well, like in the second quarter, like right at the start of that big run the Celtics had, Rob Williams just like beat his man down the court 3 times.
Yep.
And the first 2 resulted in a post pin where it was just like, okay, I'm just going to pin this guy high. I have a mismatch, throw the ball up to me. I'm good. And then the third one was just like he beat his man down the wing and, got an easy layup. A lot of it's just like playing harder on some level too. And I guess that where I go with all of this, and I know we're not talking about the Celtics. Honestly, I don't know what to say about the Celtics here. They're just like not being challenged in this series so far. And it's like boring to me to talk about the Celtics on some level. I'm excited to watch them have to play a real team in the next round that will challenge them. That's probably rude to Atlanta on some level, but Atlanta is not playing like a team that looks like a playoff team right now in terms of their cohesiveness, their togetherness, everything in that regard. So I apologize to Boston fans that I feel like I'm probably giving them a bit of the short end of the stick here. We'll talk about them way more throughout the playoffs. Like I'm so excited to watch the Celtics team. I think Jason Tatum's been outstanding. I think Derek White's outplayed both Trae Young and DeJounte Murray in this series so far. Like he set the tone in game 1 with his physicality and his willingness to like really step in there. And then in game 2, he was just the absolute mismatch nightmare of mismatch nightmares against Trae Young, it felt like. So all of that being said, to Boston fans, I'm thrilled to talk about your team moving forward. I think that the Trae Young conversation in terms of where they go now, I don't think this is reactionary. I don't think it's hot takey anymore. The Atlanta Hawks, over the course of the last few years, culminating in the DeJounte Murray deal, have kind of boxed themselves in to a really difficult situation in terms of roster building. And they need to find a way out of it. This team is nowhere near competing right now. I don't think, honestly, I think we learned at the trade deadline that like moving John Collins is not going to solve much for them in terms of what his value is. DeJounte Murray has 1 more year left on his contract. He's not going to bring back the type of value that you paid for him, even though, I think DeJounte has been himself fine this year. Yeah. I do think that moving Trae Young should be on the table for them. I'm not reacting to any of the reports that are out there that, if I remember correctly, I think Shams might have said something along this line of thinking recently. I don't think it's reactionary anymore. With the way that this organization has boxed themselves in, it is hard to find a way out that actually changes the trajectory of the franchise without moving Trae Young. Where are you at on where you sit in your mind on the Hawks moving forward? But part of this is for me, like you said at the top, this is a disaster matchup for the Hawks. Why is this any different against Philly? Why is this any different against Milwaukee? Like these teams can go just as big, right? Like Milwaukee's going to play you just as big with multiple bigs, Giannis, and they can go, 6'5", 6'4" at least across the front court. Drew Holiday is just going to back down Trae and do whatever he wants to him, right? Philly has James Harden, who's going to be able to mismatch hunt against Trae the entire time. Or I'm sorry, maybe you put Tyrese Maxey on Trae. That's not going to go any better. So I just don't know why this. Okay, it's the Cavs, right? They play super big with Mobley and Allen, and then Trae has to guard one of Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland. My point is, I don't know why this goes any differently against any of the top 4 teams in the East. So, given how young those teams are, outside of like maybe you could make the case Philly is in a precarious position with James Harden's contract coming up with X, Y, and Z, right? But like the Cavs are very young. The Celtics are very, very young. Why does this change for Atlanta moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that. I think that anytime you have a smaller point of attack defender whose effort has kind of waxed and waned through the years, you're going to have challenges stopping anybody in a best of 7 series. What we've seen for Atlanta to get to the Eastern Conference Finals before is really leaning into offense and the floor spacing. And if they can just have one reliable big man on the inside who can do enough deterrence or damage protecting the basket and then hypercharge their offense, they're going to have a chance. And I think that hypercharged offense, the first change in moving in a positive direction was hiring Quinn Snyder, who's a brilliant offensive coach. And I do think that long term, a summer and an off season with him being able to put his stamp on this roster a little bit more is something worth exploring before really throwing the towel in and playing the blow up book. But I do understand the DeJounte Murray contract situation doesn't afford you as much leeway to explore that timeline as you might want. I think the other part of this is that they just don't shoot enough 3-pointers. They lose the math battle in a game where they have no margin for error on the defensive end. And those two things combined it eats away at your ability to win games. They took the season high 3-point attempts tonight against Boston, and they had a great shooting night from DeJounte Murray, and they were able to keep it somewhat close in the third and fourth quarters to give themselves some hope that, okay, if we lean into this strategy a little bit more, we're moving on to our home court. We just need to get hot on the right nights and we'll be able to be okay. But I think the challenge with that a lot of the times comes with maybe some of the younger guys that they've had on their roster plugging into some of the role player spots. And then John Collins. That's the one that we keep coming back to here. Stylistically, with the way that Quinn Snyder has coached and found success before, with having a non-versatile point guard and 2 bigs together, it just doesn't seem to fit. I would continue to go down see what we can get back for John Collins, trust that you can play some combinations of Sadiq Bey, AJ Griffin, Jalen Johnson at those wing spots next to Hunter and Bogdanovich, maybe add another wing or a really talented defender and point of attack and help guy that you can get in there. And all of a sudden, things are starting to change where you can match up and do some things differently. But they need more switchability on the wings 2 through 4 if they're going to be able to make this work. And again, I think John Collins is the right piece there.
And when I talk about all of this, I'm not saying that I think the answer is like 100% to move Trae Young. I'm just saying I think you kind of have to look into it a little bit at this point. Like, you see what's out there at the very least, because again, I just don't know what changes against all of the top teams in the East. And oh, by the way, like, there are other teams that are coming. Like, there's a semi-real chance. There's basically a 50-50 shot that one of the teams in the East is just going to get Vic, right? There's like a real chance that one of the teams in the East is going to get Scoot. And Scoot is just going to like blow through Trae Young, like from day one. And that's not to say that Trae won't get him on the other end. Trae's a better player than Scoot is right now. But those are the kind of schematic disadvantages that really occur with Trae. And I think he really just needs to make a significant concerted effort on the defensive end of the court to make higher level adjustments. So like the Gamer Legends here in YouTube says, the Bucks and Philly play drop coverage. That kind of helps. It does. But like the Bucks can go small first and foremost with Giannis at the 5. And that just like completely negates everything. And then Philly, yeah, I guess you can say that Trae can be Joel Kryptonite, right? But I think it's way harder to outscore Philly now than it was then. Because
Yeah.
the thing that people don't actually remember about that Philly series that took Atlanta to the Western Conference Finals, Atlanta won that series on defense, not necessarily by way outscoring the Philadelphia 76ers.
They won it by certain players turning down layups as well.
Sure. Look, I think that was a 7-game series and there was one play that happened.
Yeah.
But your point there is valid in terms of the amount of floor spacing that Atlanta did not have to account for in that series. That's just not the reality of the 76ers anymore. They can surround Joel with James, Tyrese, Tobias Harris, X, Y, and Z, right? Like whoever, they can surround them with everybody if they want to. DeAnthony Melton is a real shooter in a way that even Ben Simmons isn't. So I get the point. I think it's worth discussing. It just isn't, to me, something that is going to make a difference for Atlanta at this point where they are.